Okay, continuing our Chazara of Kinyan Mesechta, we're holding on Daf He Amud Bet on the very top, second line. The Gemara here brings a Braita discussing when a person has to be mitzayen the Kvarot. Before we brought Mekorot, that a person has to mark graves. It sounds like Mideoraita. And now this Braita is talking about what a person has to mark. So says the Braita, Tanu Rabbanan. En mitzayenin, one does not have to mark lo al kizayit minamet. He doesn't have to mark kizayit of flesh, meat of a dead body. V'lo al etzem keseora, not etzem, a bone the size of barley, even though it's mitameh, but it doesn't need to. It doesn't make tumat ohel, so he doesn't need to mark if it's buried there because the tumah won't travel all the way up. It's only tameh. It's only mitameh in other ways. V'lo al davar she'eno mitameh be'ohel. He doesn't have to mark anything which is not mitameh be'ohel, which means he only has to mark things that the tumah would travel all the way up and make it ohel. Aval mitzayinin al hashidra. You have to mark a shidra if a person finds a spine. Val hagugolet, a skull. Val rov binyan, val rov minyan hamet. If he finds a majority of bones, either the majority of the number of bones or the rov of the bone mass of a skeleton, that he needs to be mitzayen if he's burying it, because those things make tumat ohel. Ve'en mitzayinin al havadaot. The person does not need to be mitzayen. He doesn't need to mark vadai tuma, which means Rashi explains, for example, like a beta kavarot, that everybody knows that there's tuma there. You don't need to be mitzayen and mark everything over there, because everybody knows that area is tuma, and people who need to avoid tuma will avoid that area. Aval mitzayinin al hasefekot. But you need to be mitzayin, you need to mark the sfekot, the places that people may not know about and are safek tum'ah. You need to mark those. What are the sfekot? Ve'elu ena sfekot. The following places are sfekot. Sechachot, upraot, ubeit hapras. So the Gemara in a number of lines is going to explain what those three things are. Ve'ein ma'amidin tziyun b'mkom tuma. You don't place the marker on the actual tuma itself, because the Gemara says shelo lahafsida et teharot, because you don't want to cause taharot to become tameh. Meaning, if one were to bury a body and put the marker directly in the middle of the body, then a person will perhaps come too close before he sees the marker on the floor, marking that area is tameh, and he'll already become tameh. And this person may have been carrying truma or kachim, things that need to be kept b'tahora, and now it became tameh and it's gone. So you're mafsid the tehorot, the things that need to be kept b'tahara, you now cause them to have to be burned and they cannot be used anymore. So therefore you cannot put the marker directly on the tumah. Ve'en marchikin tziyun mimakom tuma. But you also can't distance too much the marker from the place of tuma. Shelo lahafsida Eretz Yisrael. Because in order not to cause loss to Eretz Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael, the land is precious. You don't want to waste land by putting a marker too far from where the tumah is. People will avoid that area, which is really area that is okay and can be used. That's the Braita. Now the Gemara asks on this Braita. First thing we said on the Braita was kizayit min hamet. If there's a kizayit of a dead body, you don't need to what's it called? The kazayit of flesh of a dead body, you don't need to mark it. So ask the Gemara, kazayit min hamet eno metameh be'ohel. Then you mean to tell me kazayit from a met is not metameh be'ohel? V'hatanya or v'hatanan, they changed it to hatanan. Elu shemitamein be'ohel kazayit min hamet. We have a mefurash Mishnah that says the following are things that are mitameh be'ohel. Number one on the list is kazayit min hamet. So how could you tell me kizait minamet is not mitame be'ohel if we have a source that says straight up that it is? So Amar Rav Papa hacha bekizait mitzumtzam askinan. So says Rav Papa, he explains no. Over here we're talking about kizait mitzumtzam. It's exactly one kizait that's being buried. That's when you don't need to mark it. Why? The sof sof michsar chaser, because very soon it's going to be chaser. It's going to disintegrate a little bit, and it's going to be less than a kizayit. So if you mark it, the mark is going to be there forever, and forever people will be they'll avoid that area, even though it won't need to be avoided after it disintegrates a little bit and becomes less than a kizayit. So says the Gemara, mutav yisrafu alav truma v'kochim lefi sha'a. It's better that we, for the time being, burn truma and kochim, which means since it's not marked, people know that there's tuma there. There's everybody knows that there was something buried there recently. That people heard those rumors, but still somebody might mistakenly bring something there, and it'll have to be burned. So we'd prefer that happen by there being no marker, val yisrufu alav leolam, but not for it to be that people will burn truma that was brought there forever, even when it doesn't have to be, and that will be the consequence of putting a marker there. Therefore, they didn't mark it. You don't have to mark it. Okay, says the Gemara further, ve'eluhen hasefekot sechachot upraot. So we said in the Braita that the three cases of Safek Tumar, Sechachot, Peraot, and Beit HaPras. So now let's go through each one. Sechachot, what's Sechachot? Ilana Mesach ala Aretz. It's a tree that is covering over the land. So the Tosfot brings two different pshatim over here. Either it's a tree that's near a Beit HaKvarot and it's a nice shady area, and perhaps it's makom tsanua, so mistama, somebody was buried under there, therefore we would mark it because it's safek tuma. Or we're talking about a tree that's not a leafy tree, but there are a number of branches protruding from the tree. We know there's a body buried under one of them, and each branch is a separate ohel. Each branch is a tefach branch at least, and they're all in separate directions. We don't know which branch is the ohel that has tuma, so we have to mark the whole tree. Those are two cases of safek tuma of the tree that Tosfot mentions that that could be the case of the Gemara. That's the case of sechachot. Peraot, what's peraot? Avanim peruot hayotzot min hagader. Stones that are also sticking out from the fence. So Tosfot says the same thing you could say by the stones. Either you could say it's a stone that's by the wall of a Beit HaKvarot and it's a makom tsanua and mistama, someone was buried under there, therefore you have to mark it. Or it's a the fence has multiple stones sticking out. You know there's tuma underneath one of them, and the stone would make an ohel. You can't go under the stone, but you don't know which stone, so you have to mark all of them because that's the case of savek tuma that you have to mark. Beit HaPras. What's the case of Beit HaPras? So Beit HaPras is not a cemetery, but a field that has safek tuma in it. Kedetnan, like we learned in the Mishnah the following: Achoreshet hakever, harehi osa Beit HaPras. Somebody who has a field, and in that field there's a kever, there was a body buried there, and he wasn't supposed to, but he plowed the field and he plowed over the body. So we would assume that the tum'ah was scattered, the bones were scattered, and the body is no longer remaining and mitame in the area that it is, but the bones have scattered, and it's a Beit HaPras, it makes a field of safek tum'ah. So says the Gemara, v'kama hu oseh, how much does it make? Like you plowed the over the grave, how much does that, how far does the Beit HaPras go? How far are we considering safek tum'ah? So says the Gemara, melo ma'aneh, one full furrow of like ditch that was plowed, which is mea ama, which is 100 ama. So it'll carry the tumah 100 ama. Asks the Gemara, Beit HaPras mi mitameh ba'ohel? Does a Beit HaPras really mitameh be'ohel? Ve'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel menafeach adam Beit HaPras ve'holech. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel that a person is menafeach, he could blow a Beit HaPras and go, meaning literally go to the floor and blow the dust to make sure that there are no bones visible and exposed, and just go, meaning we're not worried about Tumat Ohel. If we were worried about Tumat Ohel, you wouldn't be allowed to continue going down the Beit HaPras, across the field. It must be that we're only worried about bones that are exposed. We're not worried about bones that are buried that would make Tumat Ohel. So why are you telling me that a Beit HaPras you need to mark if it doesn't make Tumat Ohel? You're allowed to walk across it. So Rav Yehuda Bar Ami Mishmei Deula Amar, says Rav Yehuda Bar Ami in the name of Ula, he says Beit HaPras shenidosh tahor. A Beit HaPras. Sorry, we have also Rav Yehuda Bar Ami says also a Beit HaPras that was nidosh, it was trampled, is tahor. So you see that if people, the idea is that if people walked by, then you could assume that there's no bone residue. If it's a place that people are using as a road, so you're allowed to walk over it because there's no bone residue. So you see a Beit HaPras does not need to be marked. You could walk across it. So Amar Rav Papa says lo kasha. That's not a question. Right? Again, the question is, on the one hand, we're saying you have to mark a Beit HaPras. On the other hand, you see that you're allowed to cross the Beit HaPras. There's no Tumat Ohel. Either if you make sure there's no bones exposed, or if it's a pathway that's been trampled upon, then you know there's no bones exposed and you can walk across. So it says Rav Papa lo kasha. It's not a question. Kan b'sadeh she'avad ba'kever, kan b'sadeh she'necherash ba'kever. One is talking about a sadeh she'avad ba'kever. If there's a field which we're being mechadesh. There's multiple types of Beit HaPras. There's a sadeh she'avad ba'kever, a field which the kever was lost in it. Meaning I know there's a body buried somewhere in the field, but I don't know where. That you need to mark. There's Tumat Ohel there. But sadeh she'necherash ba'kever, sadeh that was the kever, the grave was plowed, that you don't need to mark, because we would assume that the bones were scattered everywhere and it's no longer mitameh be'ohel. So the Gemara asks, Beit HaPras karile? You're going to call it a Beit HaPras, a sadeh that a kever was plowed in it, that's called a Beit HaPras? So says the Gemara, yes, I'll prove it to you. Vatanan, we learned Shlosha Beit HaPras, and there's three types of Beit HaPras. One is sadeh shene'evad ba'kever. You have a field that has a body buried in it and you don't know where. That's metameh be'ohel. Two is sadeh she'necherash ba'kever, a field that the body was plowed. That is not metameh be'ohel. And third is sedeh bochin, a field. It's called a sedeh bochin. My sedeh bochin. What's a sedeh bochin? Rabbi Yoshua bar Abba Mishmei Deula Amar. He says sadeh shemaftirin ba metim. Sadeh, a field that they would transfer over the metim from one group of people to the next. Right? People who were coming from a different city to bring the met over to be buried in this Beit HaKvarot. There was a field that they would transfer it over to the local Chaver Kadisha who's going to take care of it. Why is that a Beit HaPras? The field adjacent to the Beit HaKvarot, that's where they would make the transfer, the body transfers. Why is that a Beit HaPras? Amar Avimi Mishum Yeush Baalim Naguba. Avimi says because of Yeush Baalim. What's Yeush Baalim? Because basically Rashi explains that when they would transfer the body from one party to the next, sometimes the bodies would be dismantled. Sometimes you had people coming back from war or whatever it may be, and there was body parts that were left behind that may have been dropped in that field. First group of people assumed that the second group of people will take care of it. Second group of people assumed that the first group of people will take care of it, and they're left in that field. Therefore, that field has safek tumah, and it's also a Beit HaPras.